So it would stand to reason that as the SUV world grows, the car world would be shrinking. But if you look around, that really does not seem to be the case, now does it? And no, I don't just mean with like blah mid-size sedans, rather with fancy and sort of fancy cars. So with that, I am very happy to present today, no, not another SUV, and no, not a heavy update to an old car, rather a completely new generation of a sort of fancy car. Yes, like the GV80, there is indeed a turbocharged four-cylinder gasoline engine on offer. However, being this is our first time driving the 2021 Genesis G80, why don't we do it in style with a 3.5 twin-turbo V6, good for 375 horsepower, comes at 5,800 RPM, and 391 pound-feet of torque that comes in at 1,300 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 4,500 RPM. Now, that can drive either the rear wheels or all four wheels through anything you want, as long as it's an 8-speed torque converter automatic. Now, at the time of this shooting, do not have specific 0 to 60 and VMAX figures, but we do have what the US government calls the EPA rating here. It really is not anything to write home about, but then again, would you expect that from almost 400 pounds of torque? So it's kind of a trade-off. 18, 26, 21 combined. You know the drill by now, 4,343 pounds. If you're not a fan of imperial units, 1,969 kilograms. With that, full taps, and wow, that's actually really good. Really good. But I will say, the tach is in reverse. It goes from here to here rather than here to here. I know we talked about 1,300 RPM where the torque really comes in, but in practice, it's more 2,500 RPM to about 4,000 RPM as the sweet spot. And just incredible how this revised 3.5 can motivate a rather heavy car. In our recent G80 Tech review, you and I covered a majority of the underpinnings beneath the sheet metal, so refresher. Multi-link suspension in the front as well as in the rear. Now, before I drove the vehicle, I did have the opportunity to speak to one of the Genesis engineers and got a lot more detail. Let's start with the brakes. 14.2-inch diameter rotors in the front, 13.6 in the rear. Now, you may remember in the tech review, we spent a lot of time talking about a monoblock caliper. Suggest you go back to that episode to understand why it's important. Now, what I found out from the engineer, they are only fitted to the fanciest versions of the G80, and for the avoidance of doubt, this is the fanciest, 3.5 twin-turbo V6 all-wheel drive. But what goes into that monoblock caliper? Well, here it's a 4-piston caliper in the front, 1 piston in the rear. For the avoidance of doubt, the monoblock caliper is only in the front. Then there are the wheels. We learned in the tech review 18, 19, and 20-inch wheels. Got a little bit more clarity of how they break it out. So the 4-cylinder rear-wheel drive, that's an 18-inch wheel. And then the middle models, whether it's a 4 or a 6, most of those are 19-inch wheels. And then once again, the fanciest, it's a 20-inch wheel. Then there's that all-wheel drive system. So we talked in the GV80 episode how that was an entirely new platform. They call it the M3 rear-wheel drive. And the only other car that shares that platform is this one. Translated, even with all-wheel drive versions, its mission in life is to send as much torque to the rear wheels as possible. So what does that mean to you and I? Well, it can send up to 100% of the torque to the rear wheels. The engineer was telling me majority of the time it's like maybe 70 or 80% to the rear wheels. But let's say you're in a situation where you lose traction. Well, it can send up to 50% of the torque to the front wheels. And then last but not least, the fancier models have a mechanical limited slip differential. Although he did say something very interesting, something about them having electronic control over the mechanical limited slip differential. But if I got my engineer ease to English translation correctly, he wouldn't go so far as to saying that it's an e-diff. A gentle reminder, G80s of the past generally had a longer wheelbase than the cars in which they compete against. Think E-Class and 5 Series. Here, they've paid particular attention to the suspension setup, where there's really good control over all planes of motion. Particular attention has been paid to pitch and squat. I would argue there's a little bit of float in the front end of the car, which, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, what's happening here is when you push it to a point that it doesn't like. Remember, this is not an M5, it's more of a luxury car, and the system is basically collapsing on the outside rear wheel, which gives it that floatiness in the front end of the car. A bit behind the scenes from the tech review, that car we only had for a very short period of time, but more importantly, that was a pre-production prototype, so would not have been fair to base final fit and finish on that car. However, this one, absolutely fair game. And the only way I could put this, I'm kind of blown away. And no, not because of the design, which for the avoidance of doubt is magnificent. It's really the combination of the color and trim and the tactile feel, all the stuff you touch. Yeah, this one has Napa leather because it's a fancy one, but it's really the small details. Like, for example, the sunglass holder, it has this satin finish all the way around this bit here, and the way it opens and closes, not what you'd expect from a Hyundai, Kia, or even a Genesis. Probably something better than that. And that tactile feel is repeated through the vents, which run all the way the width of the dash, and of course the satin finish wood. There is a wireless Qi charging plate here. That's not new, nor is Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. But something a bit odd, which kind of works against all this magnificence in here, it doesn't have wireless Apple CarPlay, which is odd considering what this car is and what it's trying to do. But then remember the 3D gauges from the tech review? Now, unfortunately, between the time we shot the tech review and when we're shooting this, did have the opportunity to shoot a tech review on that 2021 Mercedes-Benz S-Class, and the 3D gauges in that combined with the head-up display is otherworldly. Granted, that's a $120,000 car. This one is still kind of cool, but now that I've spent more time with it, I can see how you can play with it and see how it becomes more 3D. Like, for example, when you switch between, say, comfort mode or sport mode, it changes the graphics in the instrument binnacle, and if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, in the sport mode, it looks a little bit more 3D to me. And with that, some constructive criticism. First and foremost, the Rotary Controller. Can we leave these in Fords? Let's go to a real shifter. Ideally, what we experienced in that 2021 Lexus IS350. Yes, an old car, but it has the right tactile feel of a transmission, especially when you put all this work into making this vehicle drive so wonderfully dynamically. We could use that tactile feedback, which we have here in knobs. Actually, they're scroll wheels for the volume as well as tuning, so I can go through radio controls. This is so much easier to use. Let's take this kind of thinking and put it into the shifter. And then we need to switch to the elephant in the room, and that would be the steering wheel. You guys were pretty much unanimous in your vote in the comments of the tech review that this does not work in the overall beauty of design here. This to me is just terrible. This is like straight out of an old Ford Crown Vic. Yeah, it's got better leather and better tactile feel, but now after driving the car, I can report it's more than aesthetics. It's the way it feels in your hand. This part is just too thick, does not feel right in a vehicle that has some dynamic intentions. Yeah, this is not supposed to be an M5, but it does have some performance to it, so let's bless it with a steering wheel that not only feels performance-oriented, maybe a bit thicker, but also goes with this beautiful design. If we could do that, that would be greatly appreciated. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game on the options game with today's contestant, an updated version of my favorite Genesis, the 2021 Genesis G80. This one a 3.5 V6 all-wheel drive Prestige, translated the best one they make, $67,650. Now I do feel compelled to point out one can have a Genesis G80 two-wheel drive 4-cylinder for $47,700. Anyway, back to this one in a stunning shade of Tasman Blue Metallic over a two-tone tan and gray interior. The contrast is incredibly striking. But what Genesis is doing with both this as well as that GV80, They're naming all the colors after exotic ports of call. So my second choice is a burgundy, believe it or not. They call that one Porto red. Either way, if it's a metallic paint, it's an additional $400. The only other thing we add is the destination and handling from Korea. That's where this car is built, $1,025 for a total retail price of $69,075. Now, if you have been watching this game for a while, you know I just sandbagged you because this is a Hyundai Kia product, which means they don't do options, they do packages. So you pick good, better, and best, this obviously being best. But I would argue the better, that one's unusual because that one's a V6, has all the go of this, and it's rear-wheel drive, and dynamically, some people might want the rear drive over the all-wheel drive. I know I would, living in California, but the biggest point about that, it's significantly cheaper, $59,100. Yeah, it doesn't have a lot of fancy bits. The things that really stand out to me, it doesn't have the head-up display, the Napa leather, or the incredible faux suede headliner. Ride quality has always been a thing with Genesis. If you put them on a driving dynamic spectrum with BMW M cars and AMGs up here and Lexus down here, actually recent Lexus, they're kind of here. Genesis was always kind of the middle of the pack or just below the middle of the pack. This has two different personalities in terms of ride quality. Here in sport mode, it has more above the fold, above the middle of the pack in terms of ride quality. However, if one were to switch back into comfort mode, there is an unusually good balance between compliance and composure. I would argue more composure while offering a better ride quality. Not quite an old Cadillac, something unusual in today's day and age. It's trying to be its own personality rather than trying to be a German. This is really good. Now, I'd be lying to you if I told you the design didn't sway me here, because if you put this next to an E-Class and even an updated for 2021 BMW 5 Series, this is by far more attractive and has arguably more presence. Now, there are two questions we have to look at beyond that. Of course, being it's a Genesis, we've got to kind of talk about the value. And yes, an E-Class and a 5 Series with this kind of equipment would be about mid-80s. But dynamically, those cars edge this one out. To me, the bigger question is what we covered in the GV80 episode. Is the world ready for a Genesis that is this expensive? The general answer is yes. But I would say that as much as I like the fanciness of this one, the sweet spot is that standard two-wheel drive V6 for a shade under 60 grand. Yeah, it doesn't have all the good stuff, but it's got all the go and all the dynamics. So with that, I'm gonna turn this around to you guys and let you guys opine about all this in the comments below. And which one would you choose? And is the world ready for a $69,000 Genesis G80? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, we are probably going to take a break from Genesis for a while because we just did 2 in a row. And I will see you in our next episode, which I believe is a Mercedes E-Class. Oh, actually, no, that's next week. It's the E63S in this stunning, brilliant blue Magno color. So until then, or hopefully before then, Bishop Peter.